Good morning and welcome to some Civil War poetry. This Tuesday morning, July the 7th, 2020, I am Vincent Hannum and we're about to get into some poetry. Morning out there, everybody. Let's see. Oh, maybe we got one person. Maybe it's just me. Haven't quite figured out the optics of this yet. But alas, it's good to be here. Episode 6. I feel like anything's possible now. We'll reach 10. Maybe it'll be a super bonus episode. And then we'll just keep going. Let's see where we're at. All right. So we're going to get down to business. First order of business. Is the coffee hot? It's hot but drinkable. Yesterday it was hot and undrinkable. You never can tell. Okay. Apologies for all those sweet, sweet slurps in the mic. Before we get started, now that we've gotten started, just want to just mention real quick a little shout out to a production company that I do happen to be a part of. So shameless plug for myself, but it is called Mischief Tales. The company focuses on creative fictional videos and stories. Nothing nonfiction or history there yet. But just wanted to throw that out there. Like the page. We got things coming out this week, including a video where I do something similar to this, but on the topic of cryptozoology. So if you want to see me talk about possibly made up history, check that out. Mischief Tales, Thursday. See me do something a little different. On this day in history, just zipping on down the lane. I have 1863. This name might be familiar to you of American history or Wild West buffs. Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Kit Carson left Santa Fe and started his campaign against the Indians of New Mexico and Arizona. So I think that's interesting. There are so many people, figures in American history after 1865 who had served in the war, and they went on later to become super famous or infamous. Like General Armstrong Custer, for instance. William McKinley was the last president who was a Civil War veteran. Apparently, Christopher Kit Carson. Don't quite remember what he did in the war. I guess he led campaigns against the natives in New Mexico and Arizona. This is a really cool site on this day. So it gives me a date, but it also gives me a quote, which I read yesterday, a quote from Lincoln. I like this quote a lot. It comes from an individual named Elisha Hunt Rhodes of the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteer Infantry. Two things about that. One, his last name is Rhodes, and he served in the Rhode Island Volunteer Infantry. Second, seems to me to just be a normal soldier. So no one famous, no general, but someone who, just a regular guy who was just doing his job. So I think that's interesting. That's the kind of history that interests me, and hopefully you. That's why you're sticking around for episode 6. And so Alicia's quote is, Sunday, a soldier of Company A died and was buried. Everything went on as if nothing had happened, for death is so common that little sentiment is wasted. It is not like a death at home. That's pretty cool. In its historicalness. Obviously, Alicia was going through a hell that I certainly can't imagine. So not cool, poignant, I would say. Alicia Hunt Rhodes. Anyone know who he is? Maybe she. Probably he. Let me know. I'll do some research later on and maybe come back at you tomorrow with some info on Alicia Hunt Rhodes of the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteer Infantry. Great. Oh man, there's so many little tangents I could have gone on. Like his name is Alicia, which just for me, I associate with as a female name, which made me think of again Gone with the Wind, which I mentioned yesterday, and Leslie Howard's character, whose name is Ashley, which I also think of as a female name, also Leslie. My point is Ashley, Alicia. Maybe there was something in the mid 19th century where it was really common. These names were maybe more male associated. That's an interesting fact I'd also like to find out. Maybe you can help me with that as well. We'll see where we go. What, looking for my book. Oh dear. Civil War poetry book. Oh, where did you go? I just had you here. It's right in front of me. Here we go. So, poetry of the Civil War. 2 groups. 1, the blue, 1, the gray. I'm going to read 1 poem each from each side every day. And just to kind of compare and contrast the sentiments from both sides. Right now, I am feeling as if the Union side, the North, is feeling a little disillusioned. Yesterday, we read a very poignant poem by Emily Dickinson that was called When I Was Small, a Woman Died. Now, if that's not context for you, I don't know what is. The side from the South yesterday, the poem from the South yesterday was called Charleston, and its tone was markedly different, I believe, in that it was describing the city life on the eve of revolution, it seemed like. So it was still very rally round the flag, which I get because from a historical point of view, like the South was essentially fighting what they were fighting for their independence. So to not have a sense of rally round the flag wouldn't make sense, right? The North, meanwhile, they're getting a little deeper into this. They're like, okay, is it really worth our men dying out there? Maybe we should just let them go. What's going on? Abolitionists would argue against any notion of pulling out. So, like I said, that the first poem was by Emily Dickinson, and obviously a name any American should at least have heard of, even if they don't know anything about her. But here I am to tell you something about her. Emily Dickinson, 1830 to 1886, was born in Amherst, Massachusetts, to a prominent New England family. Though one of the great American poets, she saw only 7 of her 1,775 poems published, all of them anonymously. It wasn't until Poems, the first collection of Dickinson's poetry, published 4 years after the poet's death, that her work began to receive proper notice. That kind of output blows my mind. Just the proficiency, proliferation. Being prolific is proliferation, maybe. One more quick reminder, everybody. I am not an expert on poetry, literature, or American history. But here is the bio of Henry Timrod, author of Charleston. 1829 to 1867. Was born in Charleston, South Carolina, the son of a bookbinder and minor poet. The young Timrod's first collection of verse, Poems, was published in 1860. An impassioned supporter of the Confederacy, he twice enlisted, but was discharged both times due to ill health. For a time, he worked as a war correspondent for the Charleston Mercury. In 1864, he moved to Columbia, where he edited the daily South Carolinian. When the city was burned in February 1865, Timrod was reduced to extreme poverty from which he never recovered. His health continued to deteriorate and died of tuberculosis. But he has 2 poems in this book, so maybe he did something right. I mean, not his beliefs or views, but personally, he has lived on beyond poverty and tuberculosis. So good for you, Henry. Alrighty. Today, we have a poem by another famous American poet, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. One of my favorite names of all time. This is from The Blue. This is called The Cumberland. An anchor at Hampton Roads we lay, on board of the Cumberland, sloop-of-war, and at times from the fortress across the bay, the alarum of drums swept past, or a bugle blast from the camp on the shore. Then far away to the south uprose a little feather of snow-white smoke, and we knew that the iron ship of our foes was steadily steering its course to try the force of our ribs of oak. Down upon us heavily runs, silent and sullen, the floating fort. Then comes a puff of smoke from her guns, and leaps the terrible death with fiery breath from each open port. We are not idle, but send her straight, defiance back in a full broadside. As hail rebounds from a roof of slate, rebounds our heavier hail from each iron scale of the monster's hide. Strike your flag, the rebel cries, in his arrogant old plantation strain. Never, our gallant Morris replies, it is better to sink than to yield, and the whole air pealed with the cheers of our men. Then, like a kraken huge and black, she crushed our ribs in her iron grasp. Down went the Cumberland all a wreck, with a sudden shudder of death and the cannon's breath from her dying gasp. Next morn, as the sun rose over the bay, still floated our flag at the mainmast head. Lord, how beautiful was thy day! Every waft of the air was a whisper of prayer or a dirge for the dead. Ho, brave hearts that went down in the seas! Ye are at peace in the troubled stream. Ho, brave land with hearts like these! Thy flag that is rent in twain shall be one again and without a seam. Cool. So Mr. Longfellow, so I just talked about how Dickinson had been very ostensibly against war. Longfellow seems to be rousing the spirit of war and saying that you can't get us. And the Cumberland, in this case, is the name of an ironclad ship. Maybe it's some history I'll touch on tomorrow. But basically saying you can't get us. We will be victorious. And I do like this last line. Thy flag that is rent in twain shall be one again and without a seam. So when we come out of this civil war, maybe our civil nation will be seamless. All right, next poem, The Gray. Let's see what the Confederates got for us today. This is called The Virginians of the Valley. It is by Francis Ouray Ticknor, someone I have not heard of before, but maybe someone out there has. The nightly... Excuse me. The knightliest of the knightly race that, since the days of old, have kept the lamp of chivalry alight in hearts of gold. The kindliest of the kindly band that, rarely hating ease, yet rode with Spotswood round the land and Raleigh round the seas. Who climbed the blue Virginian hills against embattled foes, and planted there, in valleys fair, the lily and the rose, whose fragrance lives in many lands, whose beauty stars the earth, and lights the hearths of happy homes with loveliness and worth. We thought they slept, the sons who kept the names of noble sires, and slumbered while the darkness crept round their vigil fires. But I, the golden horseshoe knights, their old dominion keep, whose foes have found enchanted ground, but not a night asleep. That's an interesting poem to me. It's called The Virginians of the Valley, yet evokes all this sense of chivalry and knighthood and sires and foes. Which, just to go on a little tangent, again, I was watching Gone with the Wind, and I remembered how much the South seemed to have this sort of grand chivalrous um, English feel about them. There was definitely a class system, obviously, but there was a sense of knighthood, which apparently comes true in this poem. Not sure when it was written, but if it was written either before or during the war, that would seem to confirm that it wasn't just sort of a lost cause, romantic hindsight view. Just as someone who personally loves the state of Virginia, um, outside of the Confederacy, it's kind of like a shorthand of all the great things that Virginia has done, and Virginians, they invoke the name of Raleigh, whose fragrance lives in many lands. Tobacco, perhaps? Yeah, very interesting. Their Old Dominion keep, and the nickname of Virginia is Old Dominion. Question: did the Old Dominion name stem from this poem? Man, I asked a lot of questions today. We'll see if they get answered tomorrow. But that is all for this morning. Some Civil War poetry. My name is Vincent. Yeah, like, subscribe, share this if you know anyone who else might be interested in poetry, literature, or, some good old fashioned Civil War history. Thanks a lot. Take care.